Hi, I'm Bob Balch with the That's Jesus channel. Welcome back to Why I Left the Church of Christ. This is episode 16. And so if you're new here, I spent more than 4 decades in the Church of Christ. I didn't leave angry or bitter or anything like that. I left because I just couldn't reconcile some of the things that I was reading in Scripture with what I was taught growing up. And so this series is just an honest account of that journey. Um, this episode is about a meal that was forgotten or shrunk. It's about the Lord's Supper, the meal that Jesus instituted the night before he was betrayed. So this meal is in the early church. They gathered around for 200 years around a meal, an actual meal, not just here are the elements of the Lord's Supper. And that meal shrank in the tradition that I grew up in. Basically a shot glass of grape juice and either a chiclet-sized cracker or a full-size cracker that you broke off, passed down the pew on a silver plate while everyone sat there very solemn and stared at the floor, or they read scripture or a hymn or something. And so I want to trace how that history happened, because the history is not taught in most churches of Christ. So a quick word before we start. Every church of Christ is different. Not any of them, none of them are the same. Some of them have moved on to a very grace-filled type of environment. Others are very old school with what they taught. So anyway, I grew up in the non-institutional branch, very conservative branch of the Churches of Christ. And my goal is not to tear anyone down, and never it is. It's just to explain some of the reasons why I left and why I stayed out. So here's what I grew up with. Every Sunday morning, without exception, the Lord's Supper happened. And that was one of the things in the Church of Christ that I do love. I do love taking the Lord's Supper every Sunday. I think there's something wonderful about that rhythm and keeping it. But here's what it looked like. So a man stood up and prayed over the bread, very solemn and quiet and reverent. When I was younger, it was a large unsalted cracker. The tray came down and you pinched off a piece, and that was your piece. Eventually, some Churches of Christ went to individual crackers that people did only grab that one cracker so their fingers didn't have to get on the whole thing. You ate it alone in silence. And then when that was done, another prayer was said for the fruit of the vine, and same thing. The tray was passed down. Everyone took their drink, and very solemn and everything. And then after that, you had the standard someone getting up and saying, "Separate and apart from the Lord's Supper, we're also commanded to lay by and store." And but that was the Lord's Supper when I was growing up. Never any questions about it. Nothing beyond that. Just a shared meal, food on the table, people eating together in the name of Jesus. That's what the Lord's Supper was. But was that what the actual Lord's Supper was in the first century? So we're going to just kind of go through this quickly. Start at the beginning, Acts 2:42 through Acts 2:46, the very first picture of the church after Pentecost. Luke writes this, that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And then a couple verses down, they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, right? They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts. This is the people who gathered around a real table, sharing a real meal, real food with joy. The phrase breaking of bread appears in both verses 42 and verse 46. There's no reason to think they're different instances of something. They are the same thing. Verse 42, it's listed alongside the apostles' teaching and fellowship and prayer. That's what the Churches of Christ typically grab onto. This is what our Sundays look like. We're going to be praying. We're going to be teaching. And we're going to have Lord's Supper, and there's going to be singing the 5 acts of worship. And it's one of the 4 pillars of that early church. But in verse 46, it's paired with eating together. One practice, 2 dimensions, a shared meal. And within that meal is the remembrance of Jesus. And they did it in each other's homes and daily. So think about that for a minute. Now, go to 1 Corinthians 11, this is the passage that most churches of Christ lean on heavily for their understanding of communion. Paul is writing in verse 17. He says this, in the following directives, so he's going to correct them. In the following directives, I have praise for you, for your meetings do, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more good harm than good. And so he's correcting them in this verse 17. What is he correcting? Well, you got to go to verses 20 and 21. So then, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat, for when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. So just a side note here, it's really hard to get drunk on shotfuls of grape juice. So it's in a larger quantity and it's alcoholic. So just letting you know. So stop. One person remains hungry, another gets drunk. You can't get drunk on that little shot of grape juice. You can't go hungry when the portion is the size of a thumbnail, right? So you can't overindulge when it's the size of a thumbnail. So what Paul is describing is a full meal, real food and real drink, and he's getting on to them about that. The wealthy members are eating a full meal, getting their fill, while the poor members are sitting there with nothing because the wealthy members are not sharing. And so here's the corrective, right? Or the just pointing out how wrong this is. Verse 22, don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God being the saved people in that church? Do you despise those saved people by humiliating those who have nothing? And so Paul is not saying to stop eating altogether. He's saying stop humiliating poor people while you do it. The rebuke assumes that the meal is going to happen. The meal is not the problem. The selfishness inside the meal is the problem. And so Paul says, hey, look, here's the solution. So then, my brothers and sisters, when you gather to eat, he has not stopping the meal. When you gather to eat, you should all eat together. Anyone who's hungry should eat something at home so that when you meet together, it may not result in judgment. So if you're hungry, right, and you're eating with this meal, you're not going back for seconds and thirds or something, you bring a whole bunch of food for yourself and you're not sharing it with anyone else. Their potlucks are probably a little bit different than ours, right? But he's saying don't gorge yourself at this meal. But it's still a meal. Wait for each other. That is a table instruction, so that when people are sitting around the table with real food, you can't tell someone to wait on each other when it's only a little cracker, right? It's a real meal. So Paul is not stopping the meal altogether. He is repairing how the meal is to be done. And I know what the objection is going to be. Paul had to correct them, so we just stopped doing the meal. I used to think that too, but Paul also corrected the Corinthians about abusing their spiritual gifts. Spiritual gifts did not go away, okay? When Paul was writing them for at least that generation, the spiritual gifts were not retired. So he corrected them for divisions. Was community retired? Did he say, hey, don't even come together at all if you're going to have divisions? No, of course he didn't do that. And he didn't say, if you're going to have problems with the meal, we're not going to have a meal at all, right? So he corrected them for lawsuits, for how they handled marriage. Were those retired? No, correction is not a cancellation. He left the institution in place and then corrected it. So Paul says, here's how to rightly do it. That is a manual for doing it better. It's not a burial. Nowhere in the New Testament, not in Paul's writings, not in Peter's writings, nobody says that we are declaring this communal meal sinful. Not one verse. And the meal that Jesus shared with his disciples was a real Passover supper. It had all of the elements from Exodus. He had even more elements that were in Exodus. We're not going to get into that here. But Jude, writing to the whole church, he mentions love feasts. That's what this is talking about. It's a current, ongoing practice without a single word suggesting that they should stop. The New Testament does not end this meal. It assumes that the meal is continuing. So here's what the early church practiced. It did not stop at the last page of the New Testament. And here's how we know that. About 111 AD, give or take 3 or 4 years, decades after the New Testament was written, right after Revelation was written, a Roman governor named Pliny the Younger writes a letter to Emperor Trajan, and he's describing Christians in his region. And he said that they do a couple of things. They met on a stated day to worship, and then they reassembled later to share a common meal. As a church, every Sunday, they met and they had a common meal. That's a Roman government official, not a Christian apologist, confirming that the church was still gathering around a meal table well into the 2nd century. So the practice even has a name, right? It's called a love feast. Look at Jude, verse 12. A love feast. It's the Greek word agape. Jude is not describing something exotic. He mentions them the way that you mentioned something that everyone is already doing and everyone knows about it. So the meal did continue to exist, but eventually it stopped. We just have to be honest. Why did it stop? Well, it did not stop because of a New Testament command. The honest answer is about, I'm going to list just 4 kind of overlapping pressures as to why this agape meal, this love feast, that incorporated the Lord's Supper into it ended. Well, the first one was abuse. I think Paul warned about it. The wealthy kept on eating lavishly while the poor went without. And when something gets consistently abused, institutions tend to just give up on them rather than keeping them, continuing to repair them. That's a human tendency. It's not a theological decision, though. It's just what people do. Second was, it was an institutional separation by the 3rd century, and we do have evidence for this. The bread and the cup had been separated into a formal morning service, and then the meal itself lost being the center. The meal was something that they came back for later, um, and um, that separation kind of split it apart. And so when it split apart, you've got this big meal, and then you've got just the elements of the Lord's Supper, and eventually that big meal just went away. So the third reason that I think that the big meal went away is persecution. For the first 3 centuries, Christians met in people's homes. For the most part, there were no purchased church buildings to meet in, and they met knowing that a suspicious neighbor or a hostile official could get everyone at the table arrested, tortured, executed. The Romans accused Christians of horrendous things that were worthy of death and worthy of prison. And so people are going to hear a big meal. They're going to see a lot of people arrive for the meal. And so that kind of gathering can draw attention. An early source describes Christians in Rome meeting secretly for their evening meal, specifically to avoid awakening the resentment of heathens. Once the meal shrank under persecution, never really fully came back, and fear has a long memory. So the fourth reason that it ended was it ended officially by the Catholic Church. It was not quietly forgotten; it was banned. In the Council of Laodicea around 363 AD, it forbade holding love feasts when gathered together. The Third Council of Carthage in 393 reiterated the ban, and then the Trulian Council in 692 AD, it decreed excommunication for anyone still holding these love feasts. The Catholic Church banned the meal in the 4th century, basically, using council authority. So here's what I came to understand. This 5-minute tray ceremony is not what the New Testament described. It's not what happened for the first several hundred years. It is what you get when you come to the text already knowing what you're looking for, already saying, this is how we've done it for hundreds of years, and so this must be what I'm reading in the New Testament. And if you arrive with that, to the Bible with that mode of thinking, and you look at 1 Corinthians 11, already convinced that the Lord's Supper is just a solemn individual ritual with no communal meal at all, well, that's just the way that you're going to read it. And you read out and ignore the things that are actually happening. You will see Paul's correction as a retirement of that meal. You will miss the hungry poor and the drunk wealthy and the waiting and the shared table, and just say, no, it's all going away. It's when you come to the text already knowing what it's supposed to say because of your tradition, it's like having a jigsaw puzzle and knowing what you think the picture is supposed to look like. And when you put the pieces together and it doesn't look like that, you just get a hammer and you make sure those pieces go together so it looks like the way you want it to look. And then when you look at other people's puzzles and it doesn't look like yours because they didn't use a hammer, they used scissors and glue to make theirs go together because they already have a picture of what it's supposed to look like. You look at them and say, yours is wrong because you didn't use a hammer and make it look like mine. Um, and that's basically what churches do. I mean, we're not perfect, right? We come to scriptures with a way of thinking that already assumes some things in our tradition are correct. So I just want to remind you, if you're watching this from inside the churches of Christ, I'm not asking you to overhaul your Sunday mornings. I am just asking you to read 1 Corinthians 11 again, slowly and honestly, without that conclusion already in your mind, and ask, what is actually happening here? Who's hungry? Who's drunk? What is Paul repairing? And did Paul repair it, or did he say not to do it anymore? Because he didn't say not to do it. He told them how to fix it. So, that's where honesty comes in. We can't go to the New Testament and call something sinful that they did there, but you just have to admit that you might have been wrong about it. And so, if you do admit that you were wrong about it, here's the next question: what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you think if you come to the conclusion that you were wrong? If being wrong with one of those 5 acts of worship um, has condemned you and made you a sinner, and for the last 30 years, I don't know how old you are, every Sunday you're sinning because you're doing it wrong, do you really think that you're damned because of that? Or do you think, well, I did the best that I could with my understanding, and no, I'm not damned because God has grace? If that's your answer, why don't you think that way about other churches who have come to different conclusions than you have about other things? So it's a consistency thing. If it's wrong, but you're not damned because you got it wrong, because you were trying to implement it the right way, why are other people damned about it? So it's it's an interesting topic, but I don't want to belabor this anymore. If you're watching this from outside the churches of Christ, just know that people inside the churches of Christ are genuinely trying to do things the way that they think that the New Testament did it because it's important to them. Um, nobody, nobody, I think, really does this the way that it was done in the New Testament. Um, but I'm okay with that because everyone is doing it the best way that they can. Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. He said it at a supper. He said it at a real meal with real people around a real table. That's what's worth remembering. And when we take those elements, stripped bare of all of the other meal part, um, that's important. So if this episode kind of spoke to you, hit that like button, leave a comment. I read all of them. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Ring the bell, all those things. And I just appreciate you tuning in. Oh, by the way, just to let you know what's coming up, I have a series of videos next. Uh, I don't know if it's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 videos on women in the church. So I think that's going to be interesting. Anyway, I'm Bob Balch with That's Jesus Channel. Have a great day and be blessed.